All right, still lots of people coming into the waiting room. We're just going to give it a few minutes here, but we've got a fully loaded presentation today, so we won't wait too long. Maybe while we're waiting, we can do the classic throw in the chat where you're joining us from. Lexi, Elena, and I are all on Vancouver Island, so it's always nice to see when people are visiting from far and wide. Nice, Toronto, Sydney, Dubai, awesome.
That's some dedication, time zone wise. Thank you
Yeah.
for what would it be? Evening of some kind.
Halifax, I lived in Halifax for 4 years, and it is my home away from home. I am jealous of you, Sarah.
Nigeria, that's far flung as well.
Oh yeah, oh my gosh, wow. It's awesome.
And Quebec City is beautiful this time of year. You get Carnival with Bonhomme. Is he the snowman of Carnival? I think so.
Because Elena, you went to school in Ottawa, right? So
I did my undergraduate in Ottawa, yeah.
Yeah.
So. Where I don't think there's skating on the canal this year. I don't think it's been quite cold enough to freeze the canal. That was always like a great winter thing you could do.
Okay, there's still people trickling in the waiting room. Actually, I'm just gonna make Elena a co-host here just in case my internet drops off or something like that. But I'm just gonna give a really brief introduction because I know that these ladies have a lot to present today and we wanna leave lots of time for questions as well. So hi everyone, I'm Caroline from Lighthouse Labs. And this is one of our Career Accelerator events. So it might be your first Career Accelerator event. You may have come to many of our imposter syndrome or interviewing workshops. We've done a lot, but essentially the Career Accelerator is free resources for people who are interested in pivoting their career into tech or just accelerating their career. And today we have Elena and Lexi, who are some hotshot recruiters out in Victoria, BC, and they have the ins and outs on LinkedIn, cover letters, and resumes today. So make sure you're asking as many questions as you can think of. They will know the answers, and grab a pen and paper if you don't already have one. And I'm going to be posting in the chat about some exciting things that Lighthouse Labs has coming up. And feel free to throw any questions for me in the chat, as well as for Elena and Lexi, and I'll just make sure that they get answered. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elena and Lexi to kick things off.
Sweet, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. There we go. Carolyn, can you see my screen share?
Yep.
Perfect. So to kick things off, a little bit about myself. I handle recruitment and community work at a Victoria tech startup called Dispatch. I've worked in this space quite a bit at a number of different startups and at animation studios. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you all today. I feel like I know Lexi and I get tons of questions to ourselves personally from our friend groups, from LinkedIn about this kind of stuff. So we're excited to share. Lexi, how about a little intro from you?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Lexi, and I work for a company called Freshwork Studio in Victoria. We're a pretty young company, about 5 years old, building custom web and mobile apps. And yes, very happy to be here. Thanks for joining us on your lunch breaks, or some of you are in your evenings, all across the world, which is so, so cool. Just talking about backgrounds briefly, I actually came from a French degree, and Elena and I always joke. I think how we came together initially is she has a history degree, and so we are perfect examples of people that did have to break into the tech scene, and we're very, very happy to be here. Please, as Caroline said, bring your questions. There's no silly questions. We always say this is your off the book time to talk to a recruiter, so please come at us. We're happy to help in any way we can.
Perfect. Yeah. So jumping right into things. The first thing we wanted to do is talk a bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to quickly go through job boards and virtual events, so ways to start finding out where we're going. Lexi, I realized this was your slide and I started talking. Do you want to take over?
That's so fun. I'll take right over. Yeah, so we're going to go through the chronology of actually looking for a job. And so that starts with seeing a job that you're interested in. That usually kickstarts all of us. So we're going to talk about job boards as well as virtual events. Alana and I both have experience both leading and participating, so really hoping we can be helpful there. How to write a killer resume, standout cover letter, and then we're going to cover some LinkedIn things as well. For those of you that are totally new to LinkedIn, I will give you some tips and tricks, and we're going to stop along the way for Q&A as well. And really want to answer your questions. Over to you.
Great, and perfect. Carolyn's going to help keep us on time as well. So Carolyn just reminded you of that. So the first thing is where to find a tech job. I think with the move to remote, there has been a huge increase of the places you can start looking. We've got some links here. Carolyn and the Lighthouse team is going to share any of these links after the session. But we did just want to draw some attention to, you can look to job boards now with remote work that are outside of the region you're residing in. So for example, the Victoria Startup Jobs Board, you know, the organization I work for, we created that as a way of bringing together job postings for Victoria startups. But now with the move to remote, anyone can check out those opportunities. So there's like all of these, especially with tech, small startup-y job boards and places where we're posting roles. And it's really great to, you know, cast a wide net, check out a lot of job boards and sites and aggregators, but use those as links to come back and apply on a business's job site. If there's one thing that is a huge takeaway for applying for work from these conversations that Lexi and I have, it's, you know, find the job you want to apply for on like a LinkedIn or a Glassdoor, but come back, you know, if you're looking for a junior dev role at Dispatch and you see it on LinkedIn, you type in that job company's name and come back to it, because on our careers page, you're going to be able to find out a lot more information about us as a company and about the role. And oftentimes job postings have like special questions that aren't hosted on these aggregator sites like Indeed and Glassdoor. So it's really important to make sure you circle back and apply like on the company website, unless there's no other way of doing it. And like Indeed and Glassdoor should be your last resort for sending in an application. And especially don't use the features these job sites have to create a resume. I get like Indeed resumes all the time that people just like dump their info into Indeed and then hit the apply now. They change your email address, so I have to get in touch with you through Indeed. I can't go directly to you. They mess up any kind of formatting. They like look really uniform. It's not a way to really stand out and to catch people's eye. So that's our note with them, where to find a tech job. In terms of virtual events, why go to them? It's networking. Like you want to, especially now when we've all moved remote, get your name out there, start making connections, get people to talk to you and say hello to, get a sense of what's happening in the industry. Like what tech stacks are new companies using? What kinds of projects are creating a lot of attention and buzz? And, you know, virtual networking, like in-person networking, like interviewing, like anything, it's a skill. And the more you do it, the better you're going to be at it. So if you're job hunting, attend virtual events. And a note on asking questions and like jumping into these conversations that are happening, do it online as you would in person. Like ask intelligent questions, preface your question with a hello. Say like, hey, I really enjoyed listening to you speak today. I had a question. I think it's really easy with the move to virtual for folks to just like dive right into the comment bar and be like, here's my question. And sometimes that comes off to the people who are hosting or people who are giving these events. It can be quite abrupt. So like approach these meetings and these kind of connections you're making with people as you would another human being. Like we're all people at the end of these computers. And I think sometimes that gets a little bit lost in the translation for virtual events. Some of the ones that I want to, and again, Lighthouse is going to send these out after the session, that I wanted to bring attention to is Startup Slam. That's a Vancouver Island-based tech event. There's educational sessions on development, advanced development, entrepreneurship, like product design. It happens once a year. Last year, all of the sessions were recorded, so you can check them out, learn from them. There's also an active LinkedIn community you can join. Canada Learning Code is a really awesome way to get volunteer opportunities that are available to you online that you can definitely use to pad out your resume and your experience. It's a great community of folks who are really passionate about education and tech. And there's also Battle Snake, which is a made in Canada coding game. There's a ton of strong community following around it. And it gives you the opportunity to practice your coding skills in a way that, again, you can bring back to discussing in a job interview or putting on your resume, linking to your GitHub to show some of the contributions you've made. So those are just some ways to start thinking of how to get involved in the community with the switch to remote. Lexi, do you have anything else there?
I think those are all great points. I might just add, nobody comes into these virtual events feeling totally comfortable.
Yeah.
Even as presenters, like, you have to push yourself a little bit and be a little bit overly animated. And, it's an interesting thing to smile at the camera when you don't see anyone else's camera on. So don't feel like you're the only person that's coming in and feeling a little bit uncomfortable and not sure how to sit and how your background looks and how much you should contribute. We're all totally in the same playing field here. And so just showing up and contributing whichever way feels good to you. Like Alana said, getting your name out there and then actually having that kind of connection point after for if you are going to connect on LinkedIn, or if you do apply to a job with one of the presenters in the future, or even somebody else that's just in the chat channel. Showing up is step one, and don't feel like you need to show up only when you feel comfortable and like you're the odd one out. Everyone feels the same way.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. Thanks, Lexi. Moving along, resumes.
Yes, so resumes, the name of the game. So as we were talking about, your resume is your 30 seconds in many cases to stand out as a candidate. And whether you're looking for a dev role or marketing or HR or whatever that might look like anywhere career-wise or in tech specifically, the way that you format and present yourself, even from the get-go, is hugely impactful. So the way that Alana was describing, I know we have a message in the chat here as well. So those easy apply links, what they do is they take all the information that you've put into the fields and they make a standard resume, which is supposed to be really helpful. But to us as recruiters that see hundreds of resumes a day, that is the easiest way to make sure your resume does not stand out at all. So one thing off the bat, you really want to make sure you have maximum 2 pages. If you can, 1 page is better. Again, come from the perspective of Alana or I that see hundreds a day sometimes. We want information that is really consumable, that is engaging. We want to see those bullet points right off the bat about the accomplishments versus just what you did every day. So I'll give you an example. So as a recruiter, I could say, day to day, I screen resumes, I interview candidates, and I give offer calls. Versus saying, in the last 3 years, I've hired over 125 candidates that are developers and business analysts for, within a 4-week span at the maximum. So what you're always wanting to do is look at your accomplishments and putting those into bullet point form. Again, with that piece around format, neatness, being really engaging. I know in a later slide, Alana's going to point out Canva. Canva is one of our biggest saviors and something that we recommend. So this would be a way that you can create really presentable, beautiful resumes where you have a little bit of color. They'll basically do the work for you. But this is, again, a way to stand out. And with that in mind, someone in the chat loves Canva. That's amazing. You always want to work smarter, not harder. And so this took me quite a while to learn as somebody that was looking for a new job. If you're into Google Docs or even Word, you want to have one core version of your resume that can be pages and pages and pages. That's totally fine. And then depending on the job that you're applying to, you're going to pull that format into a new template and you're just going to pull the pieces that are relevant to that job. So if you're looking for a React developer position versus a marketing with a front-end component, for example, you're only going to want to pull those pieces from your master resume onto this new template. But you always have that master to go back to so that you're not recreating a new format and thinking of new bullet points every single time. And finally, speaking of bullet points, definitely look at the job description and you are so welcome to copy and paste bullet points. As a recruiter, the most comforting thing for me is seeing that you've done exactly a job requirement. So I always recommend, whether you're going into an interview or even at that very initial part when you're building out the bullet points, look at the requirements of the job, the ones that you have done, copy paste them directly, and those will stand out to the recruiter. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, I just think that's such an interesting and important point. Like, as an example, we're hiring for a DevOps person right now at Dispatch where I work. And I've gotten maybe 150 resumes where candidates have listed every single technical thing they have like ever done in their entire lives back to like systems admin networking that is like so far removed from the reality of what the position I am hiring for is. And it is so difficult to gather the information as a recruiter that I need from those resumes when our job posting says like our tech stack is like 8 components, and what I need to see is that you have experience in those 8 components. I don't need to know what you did going back to like your very first job, you know, which in tech things get out of date really quickly if that was, you know, doing sysadmin work that has nothing to do with what I'm hiring for. So it's really important to go through those job postings and your resume and just take what is directly applicable. We don't need, you know, it's a marketing document, your resume. You don't need to have every single job you've ever done on it, just the ones that are strengthening the candidacy you have for the role you want. Such an important thing to remember as you're looking at creating them to keep things concise. Looking at our next slide, one question I think Lexi and I both get a lot is like, how do I do my resume if I don't have experience? That's so tough, right? So I think what you want to do looking at that is look at the projects you've done, especially in tech. Projects and contributions to open source projects can be a really great way to build your resume. Look to your friends and family. Like I was talking, I think it was on one of our imposter syndrome events recently, the woman we were speaking with was like, yeah, I graduated from boot camp. I didn't have a ton to do on my resume. My dad's a construction worker. I made a construction company a website. Did he need it? No, but it was something I could speak to of having done when I was doing my cover letters and my interviews. So things like that gives you something to talk about. That's a really great first step. You know, think about, I think, any previous work experience you have, how does it translate to your new field? So have you worked with customers? Have you collaborated with coworkers? We do those kinds of things in like basically every position. And those are things you can speak to when you're, you know, looking to create your application materials for the job you want. And it can be really hard. I think this is something that Lexi and I tell a lot of people is it can be hard to jump into your dream job. That's something that might not happen for you right away. So if you want to be a developer and you're not having luck getting junior developer positions, maybe you didn't do a co-op or you don't have that experience, how can you like think about getting that job in a couple of years, and how do you take the path to it now? And so something that we tell people to do is look for like dev adjacent jobs in this example. So look for things you could do in like QA, technical support, customer success positions that are going to help you onboard to what production development looks like, what a job in tech looks like. It'll get you up to how the different systems, the tools, the teams work. And after a year or two in a position like that, you'll be so much better equipped to apply for that junior dev position you truly want, or to, you know, get promoted up in the team that you currently work on. I've worked in a lot of organizations where when we hire junior developers, we're looking to hire folks from our technical or customer success teams because they know our corporate voice, they know our values, they know how our tooling works, and it's easy to teach them the technical skills they need because they've already demonstrated they have the soft skill abilities. I think, you know, finding organizations that need volunteer support, that's a really important one as well. We had a ton of volunteers help us with Startup Slam, a lot of whom we have gone on to interview for positions with Asset Dispatch. So find those opportunities to, like we talked about earlier, do that networking so people get to know you and are able to like kind of root for you and be excited for you. And you can use those opportunities you've done in your cover letter, which is so important, especially as you're trying to get your foot in the door, is to explain why you're excited. Like, why are you going to be good at the job? Something that I think people think they don't need in technical like application processes is a cover letter, but especially at the junior level, like how else, when you've maybe come from boot camp or like a 4-year CS program and everyone has really similar experience, also you're going to stand out. It's going to be the way you explain your passion and your interest in the job. So think about why you want the position. One thing I think we always say is like, look to the social media channels a company has, do a deep dive on their website. How are they marketing themselves? How are they putting themselves out there into the world? And why does that connect with you? Like, why do you want to work at that organization versus another one? And, you know, reiterate that in your cover letter. That's the place to use it. Pay a lot of attention to your soft skills. We can, I think I mentioned it before, but we can teach technical skills. Soft skills is what's really going to make people stand out, especially at like a really entry level stage. And we're really, as an industry, I think, have moved away from this idea of brilliant jerks being who we hire in tech. I hear this a lot, like we're just over brilliant jerks. You have to be able to collaborate and work with your team and communicate well. So show off that you can do that. And think about any like obvious experience you have that you can highlight. What's in your background that's going to demonstrate any of these skills we might be looking for when we do job postings. You know, maybe you run a tech blog that you can, you know, share and say like, hey, I've been passionate about this for ages, as you can see on my Medium posts I've done. So kind of think really outside the box is my advice for how to like kind of build up your resume when you don't have that line for line obvious experience.
Mm-hmm. Alana, one piece I'll mention really quickly is projects are huge, and that was Alana's first point in her last slide there. So any opportunity you have to show work that you've done, whether it was, you know, an assignment that you did for school, a group project, if it was, I know at Freshworks we have what we call our selection test, and that's like a mini project that you put together. And if you did the project and maybe you didn't get moved to that last stage for whatever reason, and you want to keep working on that assignment and then use that in your GitHub account, for example, all of that work is really significant, and it should be on your GitHub account. It should be on your resume. And I know that places like Lighthouse Labs, for example, they every once in a while do have little challenges, or the 21-day challenge that's coming up, I believe, as well. And so anything that you can get your hands on like that, if you don't have ideas for projects, you don't have a team that you want to work with necessarily, and kind of need that bit of inspiration, all of that going above and beyond really translates. Just as a company, us hearing that you did put in your time in your own time because you wanted to work on your skills and contribute to this 21-day program, for example, all of that makes a difference. It does make an impact when we're looking at identical resumes. So don't be afraid to go that bit of above and beyond, and then highlight it on your resume for sure.
Perfect. And I think that is a great segue, Lexi, into cover letters. I mean, the cover letter is what's going to give the hiring manager a bit of a glimpse as to who you are. And it's going to be the place you can talk about projects you've done, why you've decided to tackle certain things. It's showing your enthusiasm for the job is so important. And to, I think, like I mentioned, to start thinking about like how to get into this like cover letter writing zone is look to social media, look to people who work at the organization on LinkedIn, like see how they're communicating and try and match that tone. If you were to look at Asset Dispatch, or I know Lexi's team at Freshworks, you'd see people are pretty casual. So you can like match that tone in the writing you do, right? I think the best cover letters that I get, people just say like, hey, Alana, or like, hello, hiring team, exclamation point. And that speaks to the way we communicate here as a team. So it matches. I think you really want to stay away from, especially in tech, especially in startups in tech, this like formal business writing that we probably all learned in school. Like I still once in a while get cover letters that start with like, dear sirs, comma, and like what a great way to immediately alienate me or Lexi, right? Or a lot of people on our team. So you don't need to be as prescriptive as some of this, you know, education we got in the past. It's like you have to do this like business letter. If you're stuck, what I always like to tell people is imagine you're writing an email to like a friend of yours about why you'd want this job. You wouldn't be like, with 4 years experience in similar technologies, like very formal, you'd be like, wow, Lexi, I saw this job posting. It lines up just with where I want my career to be growing. I could like use some of the stuff that I've done in my past. You'd be really excited and you'd be informal. And so that's a really good writing prompt to start thinking of how to approach a cover letter. And yeah, dig around on websites, see why you want to apply for that job. Why does this organization interest you? And use that to kind of get your point across. And also your cover letter can be a spot to clarify if there's anything strange about your candidacy. Like if you were a banker and you went to a boot camp and now you want to be a developer, like there's something there and people are going to wonder about it. So it's easier if you address it head on and say in your cover letter, like, while I love banking, I've always wanted to explore like the ins and outs of computers because I love computers since I was a kid and this has been my opportunity. That makes you seem like a person, and it's really interesting for hiring managers to have that information. So I'd really suggest that you figure out a way to kind of tell your story a bit in the cover letter, especially if you're reskilling or coming to tech from another interest like industry. Folks are going to wonder, so you might as well like tell them why. Do you have anything to add to that, Lexi?
Just going back to your point about the language, that is such valuable information, I think. And if you're feeling like, okay, well, I have no idea how dispatch communicates internally, this is such an important piece, again, to go back to the company's careers page versus just being on LinkedIn or Indeed, where you get a very small snippet of how the company communicates and just via their job description. So a lot of the time, I know that we've put a lot of effort into our careers page as well to really try and show our culture through that page. And the language that we're using there also really mimics the way that we communicate internally. So definitely look at those careers pages. And then just in terms of the last piece you mentioned, Alana, I agree. I have questions in most resumes that I take a look at, whether it's somebody leaving a job after 6 months or having a big gap in their resume or moving from one field to another, especially with COVID. And I have said this time and time again, if you were laid off for any reason, there is so much uncertainty going on right now. I think more than ever, companies are being empathetic and understanding that there's different circumstances all around the world. Do not be afraid to call out that you got laid off. It's going to come up in your initial phone call, and you might as well just have it there in your cover letter or even in your resume in brackets, like laid off due to COVID-19. And as a recruiter, I'm like, great, don't have to talk about that. Doesn't have to be a 3 minutes in our pre-screen call wondering why you left the company after 6 months. So yes, be transparent. We're also trying to map out kind of your story as we're looking through the different dates on your resume. So try to take away that mystery for us in that cover letter.
Yeah, and I got a question here too about like what kind of tone do you recommend for cover letters so it's not so boring? Conversational. I think that for tech and for startups, I'm going to not go ahead and say like if you're applying to a job at like a massive financial institution or something that's more kind of like quote unquote old fashioned, maybe then try and find like a business letter template. But for jobs like with the kind of companies that are startups and that Lexi and I have worked at, it's like hello, comma, I'm really excited about this position. It seems like it aligns really well. It's like you'd tell your best friend or someone that you've worked with in the past your excitement for it. We want to see who you are, so the tone's going to be a bit more individual for each person individually. But practice to kind of write a couple of different intros, see what flows easiest from your keyboard and what works best for you. I think that's what I'd say for tone. And I think looking to an individual company's like social media is a really great way to start gauging what the tone of that organization looks like. Because quite often it's people on like a talent acquisition or a recruitment team that own some of those channels. Like at Dispatch, I do a lot of our social media. So if you were to match the tone that I am putting out there, it's going to like resonate really well for me, right? Because it's like kind of full circle back to me. So that's what I'd suggest there. Looking at our next slide, moving right along, a couple of tips and tricks we have. Most postings are going to ask for a cover letter, a resume, and oftentimes a link to portfolio, projects, GitHubs. So the number one thing is read that job description, read the job posting, and make sure that you understand what folks are asking you to do as a candidate, and then like do that. You'd be surprised at the number of people who try and find a way around it. And that's like, we have these processes in place for a reason. Like we have the information we need to get from all of our candidates in order for us to have a consistent hiring process. Do that. Don't try and call, don't try and show up in person. Like just do what we're asking. And that's the easiest way you can prove how strong of a candidate you are. Make sure you have a resume template. Like Lexi had mentioned, we really like Canva, but even like Google Docs has some pretty solid ones. Find something that's going to work for you. Stick with it, get good at it. Yeah, and I think other tips and tricks, if you do have an ATS you're using, that's an applicant tracker system. It's what a lot of us recruiters use on our end. So it's where you like hit the apply now button on my careers webpage. That information uploads to something called our applicant tracker system. If you upload a PDF, that's going to look nicest versus trying to upload like a document in Docs or Pages. I get sometimes that's kind of an odd one. Lexi, do you have anything else there for tips and tricks or the app tracker system process?
I would say with that applicant tracking system, we have the ability oftentimes to customize what that application form is going to look like. We, through a lot of learning recently, have put a lot more weight on those application questions. So you as an applicant really put the time and the energy into those application questions that you've already put into your resume and cover letter. Typically, if you really care about a job, we hope that you put some time in to really building that resume and cover letter to be, showing your best self and putting it out there. And so it would just be such a shame to not put that same kind of energy into the 3 questions that the company is asking you, whether they're, tell us about your experience with using social media calendars, if it's a tech marketing role, or, what do you know about Freshworks and why are you excited about joining the company? Those small things can really make you stand out. So when you see those questions, there's real people on the other side that are reading them, Alana and I, and we would love to see your effort there, because again, any way that you can stand out when we're looking at these applications, hundreds a day, really makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I'd add too as a note for that I hear people often talking like, oh, well, an applicant tracking system, it's all keyword AI, like no one looks at the resumes. And like that is probably true for some like huge organizations, maybe in the American context. It's not something that I have any familiarity with any of the tech startups, in Victoria or across Canada that I've worked with or that I have friends that work at.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to like put white words in a white background so like eyes can't see them but the machine reads them, and you have to like have the special keywords. It's actually people, and like sometimes we look at the resumes really quickly if they are not standing out for some way, or obviously like a mismatch, or someone's just like fired off whatever Indeed resume they use to like also apply for restaurant jobs. Like sure, we'll only take like 30 seconds to look at them. But if you've taken the actual time to put together a solid application, even though you're not a great match maybe for the role, it's still people reading them. And I think that's really important to remember. You don't need to like game the AI, just like do a good job at the application process and the stage.
Yeah, Alana and I, we are the robots, so.
Definitely not a robot. I think we have a break for questions about resumes and cover letters right now. If there's anything, Carolyn, you saw in the chat that we've missed, or if anyone does have any questions you'd like to ask.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions in the chat. One of them was essentially just asking if the easy apply button on LinkedIn is just a no-go, generally speaking.
I wouldn't use
Yes, it is a no-go.
Okay. Does having a big company name on your resume matter, or is it okay to have only startups?
I can take that one. I know in a smaller company, so Freshworks is 75 people, Dispatch is give or take 40 from what I know.
Yeah.
So I know that when you are a smaller company, every single person has an incredible impact. So we're very careful about who we bring on a team. Whereas in these giant corporations, you will talk to teams, dev teams of 30, for example, where there was 15 QA. And if I'm hiring for a QA, that tells me you didn't have autonomy and ownership over an entire process when you're working alongside 15 other people, for example. So when I'm looking at resumes, it's great if someone's worked in a big company, but I'm even more often looking for that experience that's in a startup where you've been super hands-on, where you've actually had exposure to the client side. Maybe you've actually worked in requirements gathering, for example, if you're a developer, or actually having insight and being part of that conversation for bigger strategy. So I would say, do not in any way be deterred if you have not had experience in a big company. Something I look for is that smaller company experience.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question is, do HR people usually check a LinkedIn for past recommendations from like coworkers and referrals in that section of LinkedIn?
I'll start with that one, Lexi, because I've been doing some outreach lately for a role. So that's when a recruiter looks for people to reach out to and says like, hey, are you interested in this job? Rather than having candidates or like at the same time as candidates are submitting their resumes for the role. So in that sense, if I'm doing outreach and say I'm looking for a tech that is maybe a bit unusual, I'll grind through LinkedIn profiles and look to see if it's mentioned in recommendations. So say we're looking for someone who has like Kubernetes experience. And if you've got some recommendations from a coworker that says like, oh, Amy was like the most solid Kubernetes dev we've ever seen. I'm like, okay, sweet, that's great. Otherwise, I don't pay a ton of attention to recommendations. Lexi, do you look at them a bit more?
I do not actually. And the reason for that is a lot of the time it will say Alana's recommended Lexi. And then right above that, you'll see Lexi's recommendation for Alana. So a lot of the time people just switch recommendations. I think when LinkedIn was a little bit newer, recommendations were a huge thing that we really relied on. And I know in business courses, it was like, your homework for this week is get 5 recommendations from your team members on X project. I don't look at them. Something that Alana and I have discussed is, to be very frank, recruiting and hiring, it is a bit subjective. So you could ask the next recruiter that would, join our next presentation, and maybe they would really rely heavily on that piece on LinkedIn. I personally don't pay much attention.
Yeah, that's been my experience with the LinkedIn recommendations as well. So it sounds kind of like maybe a cherry on the top, but not a must-have. Another question here is, for anyone who may have been laid off temporarily from COVID and maybe waiting to hear from their organization, how would you address that on your resume and cover letter, or would you?
Like if you've been furloughed and you're waiting to see if you'll go back to work.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Teresa, feel free to throw in the chat or turn your mic on if I misinterpreted what you were asking, but I think it's if you were laid off temporarily, should you address that when you're applying to other organizations, or just leave it out? And if you should address it, how?
That's tough because, like, say you were applying for a job with Lexi or I, and you're waiting to hear back if you're going back to your original, like, kind of base role in this way. I don't know if I'd put that on your cover letter or your resume, because are you going to leave your new job to go back to your old one if that opportunity was to return to you? And I don't think, like, if I was a candidate, I wouldn't put it, because I wouldn't want folks to think that I was considering leaving my new job so quickly. That would not be a great signal for a recruiter. Lexi, what do you think?
I think that's a really tricky one. I read that. I saw it come through the chat when, as we were talking earlier. It's a really hard one, because think about if you were in the spot of hiring somebody, you are putting a ton of work and a ton of time from your other team members to meet with this person, and all of those pieces about loyalty and calling out why you left a position after 6 months, etc. All of that is to understand your intention of sticking with the company, and for us putting the time into really making sure it's a good mutual fit. So it's a hard one. I would say if you are on temporary leave, I think you kind of need to reflect yourself within 2 weeks time. If my company invites me back, then I will go. Or like, what point do you say, if I get a new job, I'm going to stick with this new job? I think you kind of need to just make that choice personally. I wouldn't call it out. I wouldn't call it out, because I saw that as a recruiter and it said, I'm on break right now, but I may be back in a week or in 6 months. I would think as a recruiter, okay, so you're not very dedicated to this job and to joining our team. That's a tricky one.
There's one last question here, and then we'll move on, and I think there'll be time for questions later as well. My impression was that any company above a certain size is now using ATS, and that getting through the first step via keyword matching becomes crucial. Is that the right way to think about applications when companies use an ATS?
I think there's a lot of, like, almost fear mongering about this, because I think that there is, like, an unprecedented amount of people looking for work right now, and folks are kind of holding on to anything to say, like, why they're not getting screened into hiring processes. I know with our ATS, we can't enable it to do a keyword search, but where keywords do come into play is that for, say, intermediate developer role, we need someone who writes I become the keyword search, because I am looking through all the resumes, because I'm getting so many resumes, to look for that keyword. It is, though, front and center in our job postings that our team works in Go. So if you have that experience, you should be, as a candidate, highlighting it somewhere in your application so someone can see it, ideally in, like, a well-structured template where it is going to be, the weight given to that in your application should reflect the weight that we've put on it in our job posting. so in that sense, yes, there is kind of a keyword optimization that you need to be doing, but I think it would be erroneous to think that you have to trick the machine to get past it. You have to communicate why you're a good candidate for the job, and boiling that down to like tricking the machine with keywords is oversimplifying it. Lexi, what do you think?
I agree. And back to that point of the idea that an ATS has this AI component where, like we were saying, we were kind of joking earlier, like for Freshworks and Dispatch, Alana and I are those robots. Like we are the keyword searchers, like you said, Alana. So I think the question was around, is that the right way as a candidate to think about an applicant tracking system? I think it is not the right way to think about it. Assume that a real person is going to be reading your resume, and those same keywords or key ideas, those skills that we're looking for, if you are qualified for the job, they should be in your resume, regardless of if it's going to be, screened AI wise, or if it's going to be Alana and I looking.
Yeah. Sweet. Carolyn, shall we continue on? I think we'll have more time for questions too.
Yeah.
Okay. So coming up next, let's talk about LinkedIn a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So LinkedIn has become more and more popular over the years. And there's a question of why should I even have a LinkedIn? If I'm somebody that's looking for a job in tech, is LinkedIn somewhere that I should be? We will talk about building out your network and how recruiters can actually find you via LinkedIn as well. So for some of you, if you have never heard of LinkedIn at all, no problem. It's basically like Facebook, for example. It is a social networking platform, but it's specifically for professionals to connect. So I have definitely used LinkedIn in the past as a candidate to grow my network. And so what you want to do, where Facebook, more now from my understanding, is connecting with your friends that you have a personal relationship with. LinkedIn is, you do not need to have that personal connection, even meeting in person. There really is an understanding that everyone that's connecting with each other is to build out their networks and connect with people that might be able to help them professionally, or they might want to share what they've been working on professionally, or connect with other like-minded people that want to work on projects together. So one thing that I would do is definitely connect with past classmates, with past coworkers, with professors, with those that you've done group projects with, or if you've connected through a Lighthouse Lab, whether it's a boot camp or one of their 21-day challenges. All of those people are going to be significant in potentially helping you get your next job. So what you want to do is, number one, let people know that you're looking for a job. There is no harm in reaching out and letting your network know. So many of our candidates, probably about 30%, I think we were just looking recently, of our candidates at Freshworks came through referrals. So number one, you would want to share with your network that you are looking for a job, and you can feel pretty open about offering people connection requests, which is the same as on Facebook, a friend request. Finally, recruiters have this magical backend that we pay a lot of money for that will help us actually find candidates that are open for work. So let me show you how that works. Alana, do you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, so this is just a screenshot from my profile, and for the sake of today's exercise, I have turned my profile on as being open for work. So if you are new to LinkedIn, you will be invited to build out a profile, and we'll walk you through the steps. So this is really, really crucial. You will see where I have circled. You can either show recruiters that you're open to work, and you would use that little pencil to edit, or you have the ability to not have this feature turned on. So in the back end, what that looks like is those of us that pay for LinkedIn Recruiter, we actually have a back-end database, if you will, where we can look at candidates that have said they are open to work. So we're not just blindly sending requests out to all candidates across the board and have no idea if they're loving their jobs or just got promoted, or if they are completely open and looking for jobs. So right off the bat, this is definitely something that you can do. And well, I think it's showed right there. Go to your profile, toggle the edit, and you can show open to work, and then you can list different skills or different titles that you would be interested in being discoverable for. I'm going to move on to the next one, Alana.
Yeah. No. There you go.
Cool. So we're not going to spend too much time on this today. I just wanted to give a very brief overview. I did screenshot here, so imagine that my profile was one long column that you could scroll down. So if you're totally new to LinkedIn and it feels very intimidating, I'm going to give you just a couple tips on where even to start. So we've talked with marketing candidates in the past, and this probably applies more to those more creative roles than it does for just a developer, for example. But recruiters will very often go to your LinkedIn if your resume specifically is not super clear. So as we talked about earlier, if there are those gaps or there are question marks and they're not explained in your cover letter, or even for me, if a format of a resume is really hard to follow, but I can see that the person has a lot of experience, I'll oftentimes search their name in LinkedIn, because you will see the roles listed chronologically with the years of experience right next to it. So if you can see that second column that's on our presentation screen here, you'll see Freshworks and then my different titles, how long I've been there, and an opportunity for the extra bullet points. So again, a tip, this should be your step one before you put in your banner or your picture. You definitely want to have your experience that is mapped out, and it should be identical to your resume. That is a huge red flag if it says that you're still or you've been somewhere for 2.5 years and your resume says you've been there for 1 year. So make sure that those two things line up. Make sure that you have, again, your accomplishments listed. LinkedIn is a godsend for those of us that want to be a little bit more formal in our resume, or maybe you're confined by the 1-2 pages of a resume, but really want an opportunity to show your personality, show your brand a little bit more. And you can do that with your picture. So you want something that's a little bit fun in most cases, so something you're smiling, but still professional on the professional side. You also have that opportunity for the banner. So you'll see, if you look at my picture just above, you have the Freshworks banner logo behind you. Maybe you're a DevOps specialist and you want to have like the, you were participating in the last, DevOps swamp. There's these events around the States oftentimes. And I know as a recruiter, when I see somebody that has branded their page to be really specific to one of their passions, that tells me a lot right off the bat of how involved they are in the community. And then in the About section, yet again, you had that extra opportunity to be a little bit more informal than maybe you would feel comfortable doing in your resume. So I guess my overall kind of tips here, I do want to be respectful of our time on our last couple topics. Do make a profile on LinkedIn. If you're going to make a profile, make sure that you do check in on it often enough. You're sending connection requests. Your requests don't have to be very formal. They don't have to be people you've met even in person. It's always really helpful to have a little connection note when you're sending a request, like, hey, I saw that you're working at Square. That's a company I'm really interested in. Like, would love to follow your journey there, for example. You do want to add a picture. You do want to add a banner. And again, this is an opportunity to show your personality a little bit more. If you are open to opportunities, 100% turn on that toggle of open to opportunities. And then Alana and I and the other recruiters of the world will know that you are open and interested in work. And if you would like, you can add your contact information. So make sure if you do add your contact info that this is an email address that you do check regularly. So again, when Alana and I are using LinkedIn Recruiter, if we're, do find your profile, you've said you are open to work, we have to send what's called an in-mail because we're not already your connection. And that's a more roundabout way for recruiters to connect with you. It's like a direct message via LinkedIn. If you do already have your email address posted here, we can email you directly, and that's such a more direct connection for us.
Great, sweet. And I think a note on other kinds of profiles you can use. If you have a GitHub, you've been doing some project work, it's been stored there, have it searchable by a name. I've been doing some sourcing, looking for candidates, and I've been getting a lot of great info on GitHub. Our hiring managers love to see people's GitHubs, but it can be really hard to match like your fun GitHub name with your maybe your LinkedIn profile, or if I'm just like searching to figure out who you are. So if you are open to people contacting you about work, make sure that you're going to be able to match like your GitHub profile to who you are as a person. It's great to see a lot of the work you've been doing there. So maybe even put your email address on your GitHub profile if you're open to people contacting you based on it. AngelList is oftentimes really similar to LinkedIn. You can search profiles, you can have some information about who you are and the work you're open to doing, what kind of organizations you'd like to work for. On your angel list, if you've gone to the trouble of building out a LinkedIn profile and you want to work in tech, just like copy and paste it all into angel list. It's just a different way that people will be able to find you. And it doesn't hurt to have your profiles searchable and available across a number of different places like this. It just helps build out who you are as a person, your employee brand, if you will. It's kind of a silly way of looking at it, but it does make a difference for recruiters who are trying to fill in the gaps in their knowledge about you and learn more about who you are and kind of work you're interested in doing. Just being mindful of the time, let's talk interview tricks just quickly. So say like all this stuff we told you today really works. You get a phone screen. What should you be doing to prep for that phone screen? One that I always tell people is to think of a few questions that are relevant to the position that you're interviewing for, the work the company does, and bring those with you, especially now when we've all moved to interviewing remotely. You can just I know Lexi actually has a piece of paper right now with a whole bunch of notes written on it. You can just have that in a way you couldn't in in-person interviews. People felt uncomfortable bringing a notebook full of questions, full of conversation pointers, full of things that they wanted to mention about their candidacy. And now when we're doing remote interviews, you could have your entire desk covered in those kind of notes to help make you sure you're staying on track and that you're hitting the points you wanted to hit. So do some kind of set up ahead of time to set yourself up for success if you're doing these things via the phone or via remote, so you can refer back to your notes, you can refer back to the exact resume you sent in for that job and remind yourself why you were excited about it in the first place. Anything else you want to add here, Lexi?
I think you've basically covered it. I am a huge advocate for Post-it notes. And I will just say, you always want to go into any interview knowing about the company. And this is said time and time again, do your research. What does that actually mean? So look at the company's careers page, and the easiest, at the smallest step to be prepared for the interview. So find maybe a blog post that you really love that was connected through the careers page, or find a recent award that the company has won. Bring in at least one thing, but hopefully even more about your interest in the company or what you know about the background. And there is no excuse if it is a phone screen, especially. So even like with Alana said, this could be all my company information and I could just be basically reading it off in my video interview. If I'm on a phone call, I could literally have the company website right in front of me. So these are maybe cheats, if you will, but totally use them to your advantage.
Great. I think too, one thing that I always try, I never do this myself, but I always tell people to do it. So be better than me, is when you're applying for jobs, save the job description. Sometimes companies will only have them posted for a few weeks. Sometimes they'll disappear, they'll change. And you'll want to go back and remind yourself before your interview or your phone call about what the job description said. And that will help you remember why you were a great candidate for it. But if that's been pulled off the internet, you're not going to find it. You're not going to be able to refer back to it. So copy and paste it into an email, email it to yourself, take a screenshot, do something to save that so you can refer back to it as you get further in the recruitment process. And being mindful of the time, shall we move into questions?
Yeah,
I'll stop the screen share and we can just chat.
There's a bunch of questions in the chat. I'll start the first one, but then you guys can kind of read and pick and choose which ones. The first one is from Andy. As a new developer coming out of boot camp, changing career paths, how do you know how to position yourself where prior experience, in his case, he has 10 plus years of experience as a designer, what kind of experience is relevant to showcase to a company?
Yeah. Prior experience, we call it life experience, goes a very, very long way. It usually talks about loyalty that somebody has had to a company. Maybe you have management experience. Maybe it's not even direct people management skills. Maybe you've been an onboarding buddy for somebody in the past. Maybe you've used technologies that you've used Slack and you've used Trello and G Suite, which you may not have if you were coming directly out of school, but in this new field, for example. So I would say super relevant. Make sure you are being intentional about actually looking at the skills that are directly transferable. We don't want a whole recap of what you did as a designer and for your resume to highlight that only in particular, but really do reflect on what are the skills that I'm going to bring into this new role that's going to make me a more valuable team member than somebody that is coming fresh out of school, for example. I would totally draw from that 10 years of experience.
Yeah, and I'd look to the kinds of organizations you're applying to. If you're applying for like a back-end development role in a company that doesn't seem to have product as one of, or like doesn't have design as one of its most important values, like maybe you don't need to spend so much time highlighting that. But if you're looking at like a front-end role at a company like MetaLab, say, or Dribble, that is like very design driven, that's a time to kind of think like, oh, I can talk about design like maybe quite a bit. I can use those design skills to make my application look really smart. So I think to what specific job you're applying for, and is there a relevancy there that you could lean into it even more?
Absolutely. There's a question here from Song. First of all, thanking you for the helpful tips and any advice for how to structure your LinkedIn profile for tech when you're looking to pivot careers. So your previous experience isn't directly applicable. So this is kind of following up with the previous question. Is there anything different you would do to structure your LinkedIn if you are changing industries?
I don't know if it's doing anything different per se, but I think there was also a question in the chat here about that profile section. And so this all comes down to, again, those question marks that a recruiter or an HR team might have about your background, your resume. So, maybe you would have that designer role, let's say. So maybe you would have, designer, 10 years experience, but again, instead of listing out all the bullet points of your day-to-day responsibilities, you would look at, okay, what skills are transferable for this developer, this new field of development that I'm moving into. And then you would have 4 bullet points instead of skills that would be transferable. And then in that profile section, I would say something like, and again, you can be a little bit more informal. So something like, designer in a past life and now developer to be, looking for my next opportunity with a design centric mindset, or whatever that looks like. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think, yeah, and to add to that too, if there's tools you used in your previous organizations or your previous career that might be used in the future. So if you had, a couple of bullet points about the skills you had, and then at the end be like tools used like Trello, Slack, G Suite, things that would translate well to the new industry you're moving into, that can be the kind of information folks would want to see as well.
Totally. You two can kind of look through the chat and see which questions you want to prioritize, because I see we only have 3 minutes left.
Salaries is an interesting one. Salaries at tech startups are all over the map. One thing that I would do if I was trying to figure out how to answer that question, as a candidate, pay scale, Glassdoor. Sometimes you can look to recruitment and placement agencies, especially big ones in BC, publish salary surveys that you can trade your email address for. So like Robert Hall or Robert Half, Hayes Group has them. You can sign up for those and they will give you, they're hard to read, so you have to really comb through the data, but they'll give you a sense of what industry is paying for a certain geographical area for certain job titles. You can use that. More companies are starting to post salary ranges on their job postings, which is really great. So you could look at a whole bunch of different job postings and see if any of those have ranges posted and try and build out an industry-based range from them. But yeah, that's definitely a hard part of the industry. I don't think, Lexi, do you have anything else you think of there?
I know something we've talked about in the past is, I guess this is a bit of a tangent, but on the same thought of salary, coming into that initial pre-screen call, knowing it's very likely you're going to be asked for your salary range. So after taking the advice from Alana and looking at a couple of those different data pieces, be prepared to be asked the question of your salary expectation and be prepared to know what you want to say. Now, I have definitely had candidates say, I'm still doing my research and I'm really excited about this company. I don't want to, overshoot. Can you actually share the range that your company's budgeted first? And they may say, okay, yeah, actually we were thinking X, between X and X. What do you think about that? Or they may say, at this point we're building a range ourselves, so we're not prepared to share. But if you have numbers to share, that would be great. So I think just being prepared for that conversation and not being afraid to come in and say, I'd actually love to know your range as a company first. Again, you may get an answer, you may not, but I think it's really appropriate to have the confidence to have that conversation early on. You would likely save yourself a lot of trouble if in the very end, after you've gone through hours and hours of excitement and interviews, being on totally different ends of the spectrum. So yeah, I would be prepared to have that conversation early.
Yeah, cognizant that we are just kind of in our last couple of minutes here, there's a question about Canadian work experience. I think that there's definitely like no question about it that people face bias, and people face bias in hiring practices for so many reasons. With the teams I've worked with, it's more that people want to understand what your experience is, and it can be hard for folks to figure out how to write a resume or a cover letter that's going to work in a Canadian context to best highlight the experience they have. And I think that's where I'd tell kind of newcomers to Canada focus, is to use resources like this, like hit the internet and figure out like how to write your resume and cover letter in a way that's going to best highlight the experience you have in a way that will be easy to be read and understood by the Canadian audience you're now writing to. There's a blog called askamanager.org. She's got great advice on how to put together a resume and cover letter if you're kind of like starting from scratch, or if you're from a culture that has like really different standards for those kind of documents. I think that just trying, like we've been saying, like to highlight the experience you have in a way that's going to be easy to digested by your hiring team that you're writing for, knowing your audience, and putting that package together in a way that's going to stand out is going to go leaps and bounds to kind of easing some of those kind of rocky transitions from overseas non-Canadian experience to the experience that companies are looking for here in Canada. I know, Lexi, you work with a lot of non-Canadian candidates. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that was such a good point that you made about looking at the structure of a resume in different companies. In different countries, I should say. I know I see a lot of candidates from other countries that will have a picture in their resume, that will have their birth date, their religion, their marital status. Those are all things in Canada that we have very strict policies not to ask about and not to look into. So just looking at a way that when flag your resume, looking at the structure in Canada, like you said, would be really helpful. If you are coming from another country, and especially English is your second language, I highlight to everybody, please have a friend, a coworker, a professor look over your cover letter and resume. We all make mistakes after we've been looking at the same document again and again, but especially if English is not your first language, please use your resources, have a friend or somebody that is more comfortable with English, read over your documents. It goes a very long way. It's a very immediate flag that is so easy to avoid.
Yeah, and I think there's one more question here, Lexi. Do you have a second? We can talk about it quick.
Mm-hmm.
Great. It's how to address gaps in your resume between jobs if the reason for the gaps due to personal matters like family issues. How would you address this, or if you would address it in your cover letter? I think depending on how comfortable you are with talking about that scenario, I would have absolutely no problem if someone said like, yeah, I'd had to step back from the workforce for a year to take care of family issues. So I'm really looking forward to diving into X, Y, and Z about my new role. Just like that, you know, I think more and more tech companies, especially startups, I notice have in their application or on their job postings, a line at the bottom that says something like, I'm going to try it. I've written a few of them. It's like, have you had to step away for caregiving responsibilities? Have you got any gaps in your resume that seem unexplainable? Like, please let us know in your cover letter. Like, we're so happy to hear from you. And so if people are calling that out and calling it in, especially, and saying like, we understand that people have lives that happen. We understand there's reasons that you haven't been able to like work exactly the same, like 4 jobs for 4 years at a time and have a really tidy resume. If people are asking you to provide that information, for sure, make a quick note about it. I think you don't need to go into like, oh, I've had this like horrible personal tragedy and that's why I had to step away, but say I had to take care of family matters just like you did in this question, I think would be a totally fine way of doing that.
Totally agree. Yeah, short, sweet, just answering the question. I was being a caretaker to my family, and leave it at that.
Yeah, I think, and then the yes ends. I was being a caregiver for my family and I'm excited to continue on in this process. Show that you're ready for coming to work if that's something that you truly are able to do.
We actually had early in the Career Accelerator series, we had someone from LinkedIn give a LinkedIn workshop, and he was talking about gaps in resumes. And he said, you know, if you were a mother, as an example, you probably have better project management experience than most candidates who have 5 years of project management experience in a company. So there's always ways that you can talk about those things. Thank you so much, Lexi and Elena. And we even went over time, and I think that there's still loads more questions. So for everyone who's here, you will get the recording in a follow-up email along with some of the resources that they referred to. And we'll also be putting out a feedback survey. So if you have more questions that went unanswered, throw them in there, and hopefully we can try and get Elena and Lexi back here sometime. And one last thing I'm going to throw in the chat is the registration for our data challenge that's starting tomorrow. And just a reminder to always reach out to Lighthouse if you have any questions about our career services and the type of thing that we offer. Always happy to chat about those things. So thank you again, Lexi and Alana. And I think they're probably going to throw their LinkedIns in the chat as well. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having us. I have to find out what my LinkedIn URL is. We do this every time.
I am too. You can always look up folks on LinkedIn just with their names too.
Yes.
That's what I usually do if I attend webinars like this and I like thought the speaker was really great. I always follow it up with a LinkedIn and be like, hey Casey, I really loved what you said today. Thank you so much. And just see what happens from there. You never know.
Totally. All right, thanks. And we'll see you at the next event. Bye everyone.